Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for taking the time, an hour out of your day, hour and 15 minutes out of your day to join us today. I'm going to keep letting people in as I introduce Jen Brandel. Many of you, I think, were on a previous webinar that we had with Jen. She is the co-founder of Hearken. And also the co-founder of Election SOS, Democracy SOS, a new project that she can tell you about for this midterm election year. I don't really think she needs a whole lot of introduction, and I am just going to let her start off and get going. She's here to talk about measuring the impact of your engagement. How do we figure out if we're making a difference? And how do we figure out, frankly, how to monetize engagement? That's a big part of it. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much. It's really great. I'm just reading through the chat here where all of you are coming from around the country, continental and beyond, and the roles that you have. And I'm so glad to see there are folks here that really span from content direction to membership and marketing to engagement and analytics. So I know it's impossible with this kind of group of folks with different backgrounds to go as deep on every topic as I would love to. And some of this might be one-on-one to you all. Some of it might be new. So just know that, I'm going to touch on a few different things. Hopefully you're going to find usefulness in most of them, but also feel free to jump in if you have anything to add from your personal experience or from your vantage point and your expertise. This is going to be an interactive session where I am going to ask folks to come off mute and participate at various points. So please don't be shy. Also, once I go into screen sharing mode in a moment, I'm going to have a harder time monitoring the chat. So if there is something you want to jump in and make a point to say, please just feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in. We'll also have time at the end for questions, but I'm happy to take questions as we go. So like Elisa said, and just to let you know a bit more about my background, I was a reporter at WBEZ in Chicago for a really long time, and created this ground up series called Curious City, which was really flipping the script on who called the shots about what reporting that newsrooms did. It was all about listening to the public, what questions do they have, and how can they set the agenda for the newsroom. And so from that, I started Hearken, and from that, a lot of other initiatives have spun out, including Election SOS and Democracy SOS. I will say we have another few days. If you haven't heard about Democracy SOS, we are accepting applications for a couple more days. If your newsroom is interested in long-term support or a 9-10-month program that supports long-term change to editorial work around elections, because we know horse race coverage and some of the ways that newsrooms have traditionally done elections coverage hasn't yielded the results we've wanted. So it's a great collaboration with Solutions Journalism Network, Hearken, Trusting News, and Amanda Ripley, who wrote this book I keep with me at all times called High Conflict, which is all about division and how to do your best to avoid high conflict in your reporting. So anyway, I will throw a link in the chat real quick to that if you would like to apply. We encourage it. And now I will jump in to the actual presentation. So, all right. Share screen. And can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, super. All right, so before we really dive in here to the deep part of this, and I want to say deep here in this deep dive context is not going to be getting into the super wonkiness of the millions of ways you can track and keep tabs, because every newsroom is really going to be very different in terms of the tools you use, what you care about. We're going to talk about principles here, but we're also going to talk about the profundity of setting metrics and why it's so important, and why on the engagement front, you really need to think about the profound impact you're looking to make when you're setting your metrics. But before we dive into that, I wanted to share, it's good to have goals and metrics all the time, that I have 2 goals and metrics for today, and I want to be transparent and see if I can hit them in the course of this call. So my first goal is to help America Amplified newsrooms feel more confident in setting metrics by the end of this call. And then my secondary goal is to help American Amplified newsrooms feel more excited about setting metrics. Maybe excitement and metrics is not something that goes together unless that's part of your job and you happen to be one of those people who love it. My metric here is just going to be for everyone to start this session ranking on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident and how excited they are. And then at the end, we will do this again. So take a moment. You should see a poll that just popped up. And please, please take a moment. And question 1 is, how confident are you? And question 2 is, how excited are you? And sorry, I realized too on question 2, it says not confident, very confident, but think about it as not excited and very excited. Just another minute here. Almost everyone has participated, getting close. This is great. I feel like Zoom just improved their poll.
Yep.
Okay, just in case the last few folks are going to grab a cup of coffee and not at their computers, I will say, I think we can end the poll here. And where we're at is confident. Okay, so we have 17% are not confident, or well, let's say more than half of you are somewhat not confident to middle confident, and no one is very, very confident. Just 8% of you are a 4 out of 5. And then how excited you are, looks like people are kind of like hovering in the middle, with 13% very excited. So I'm very excited that there's that group here, but a little bit more like not excited at all. Okay, this is great. We're going to revisit this at the very end. I'm going to share the results. Hopefully you guys, can you see that, the results here on your screen?
Yep.
Okay, super. All right, I'm going to close that down and then we'll revisit it at the end, see how we did. Okay, going into this. What I want to really start by saying, and this is maybe my soapbox moment, is that metric setting is way more profound than you think. It might, depending on what part of the newsroom you sit in and what your experience has been in newsrooms, setting metrics may never have been your job before, and it might feel kind of foreign for it to be your job. And it might feel kind of annoying for it to be your job as well. If you're thinking, my job is to create really great content, not to figure out exactly what happens to it, who consumes it, where it goes, how it, adds up to the bottom line. But increasingly, newsrooms are asking editorial staff to think about it and to be really active in figuring out what is important. And so this big, big sentence here of what we decide to measure ends up defining who we are and what we do. I think that is absolutely true. So when you're thinking about the metrics you are setting, you're actually, at the end of the day, deciding your strategy for whether it's a series, a project, one story, a desk, your whole newsroom. However you're setting metrics, you are basically saying, we're headed in that direction and here's why. And so while it might feel a little bit like, oh, I need to like track and put things in there for someone else to look at and tell us if we're doing a good job, you actually have so much power in changing the culture of your newsroom and changing the culture of the teams you're on when you think very deeply and intentionally about what metrics you want to measure and why. Really, it's the why behind it and why they matter. So I just want to say, while it might feel, and I still find myself being like, whenever anyone asks me, how am I going to know is this successful? I have my knee-jerk reaction of like, I just know it in my gut. This is important to do. But then I take a breath and take a beat and think about, okay, well, what are ways I would know beyond my gut and be able to convince others and share with others that this is important? And this is where we get into the hard work of rolling up our sleeves and trying to figure out what is actually important. The other thing I have here that I want to mention is what counts and what is countable are not often the same. And because we now live in the digital world where so many different things are countable, there's kind of been a pendulum swing into just really focusing on all the things that you can easily quantify and all the numbers that you might be able to spin up into a nice dashboard or a report. And that's tempting to just make those your metrics, especially around engagement, because engagement can kind of feel fuzzy. But I want to encourage you to think beyond what is countable in a quantitative, digital footprint kind of sense. And the last thing I want to say just before we begin is that there are so many ways to approach engagement and metric setting. There are SMART goals, OKRs, KPIs, all of these different things that we'll get into later. And it really doesn't matter which system you use as long as everyone knows what those acronyms mean and you're all aligned on why they're important and where you're going to track them. So let's see. Here's another quote. I want to just see if anyone is open to. A lot of you public media folks have great reading voices. Is anyone open to just unmuting and reading this quote to us? I know it's kind of long, but we'll just see if there's a volunteer. If you are, feel free.
I will.
Thank you.
Metrics account, caveat, the tyranny of the quantifiable. What can be measured almost always takes precedent over what cannot. Private profit over public good, speed and efficiency over enjoyment and quality, the utilitarian over the mysteries and meanings that are of greater use to our survival and to more than our survival, to lives that have some purpose and value that survive beyond us to make a civilization worth having. The tyranny of the quantifiable is partly the failure of language and discourse to describe more complex, subtle, and fluid phenomena, as well as the failure of those who shape opinions and make decisions to understand and value these slippier things. Rebecca Solomon.
Thank you so much for reading that. I hope something about that quote hits home with you, that a lot of the things, especially when it comes to engagement and the kind of relational engagement that is maybe one-on-one or out in the field or through emails that you're having back and forth with listeners or sources, these are things that are slipperier than just saying how many hits did we get on that story, or what's our listenership this month. These are so important when it comes to engagement, because at the end of the day, it's about strength of relationships, and that can't always be easily quantified. So this is just a caveat to say there's always going to be things missing that aren't easy to add into a report, but it's very important for y'all to pay attention to those things, especially when it comes to fundraising, which I'll get to in a moment. So one story I want to share real quick here, and then invite your feedback as well, is about my personal favorite metric. I had when I was at WBEZ and we ran Curious City. This is not something I ever could have put into a grant report as my, what I was aiming to do with this series, but it was something that was an outcome that I felt was so important to keep track of and to share with the newsroom. And it was how many handwritten thank you cards we got as a desk and a team from the public. We had an entire area back when we would work in person scattered with these thank you cards that were just posted up on our cubicles. And that was something, again, we didn't have a tracker for the entire organization of how many handwritten thank you cards do you get. But to me, that was such an important and favorite metric that was not easily quantifiable and not something I could have planned for. So before we go on, I want to hear from you all, and feel free to just unmute yourself here and I'll add it into the deck here. But what are some of your favorite metrics that might not be something that you can easily count, something that's a little bit slippery? I put an example here of like sources feeling respected and heard by your reporters. That might be something that you find really important. So anyone feel free to jump in, and I'm going to go off this mode here and add in whatever you all have.
Putting someone in a story for the first time.
Oh, sorry, I missed the first word. Doing what?
First time sources, like putting somebody on the radio for the first time.
Oh, great. Excellent. What about all y'all? Anything else? And no matter where you sit in the newsroom, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, I'd say community interactions in Spanish, whether that's an interview or not.
Great. Anyone else?
Not a favorite metric per se, it's actually the reverse, but we're keeping track of racist hate mail.
Oh, wow. Say more about that.
Terry, do you want to talk about some of our favorite emails and voicemails that we've gotten on stories?
Yeah, well, at various points where we've done different stories, one comes to mind with something that we did with the about violence against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. We got blowback on that. We got blowback when we did a story on police reform in Suffolk County and the diversity of the police. We got a surprising amount of blowback on that. So it's just sort of like if we're getting hate mail, we must be doing something right.
Wow. I mean, I don't know if this is a correct way to quickly summarize it, but blowback for stories that humanize people.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I've never thought of that as a favorite metric, but you're right. There's something there. If it shows that your newsroom has a value that you are upholding in your reporting, and you are upholding it regardless if the public or all of your listeners are in agreement.
I'm from corporate support, and so I go to a lot of business networking meetings. And so one of the things that's been very positive for me in the about almost year and a half that I've been here is getting positive comments from people that are like, oh, I'm a huge fan, or, you know, I'm a listener, I'm a viewer, or I love that program I saw the other night, that kind of thing.
I love that. That's so true. Like, I remember in Chicago when I was living there. I'm in Los Angeles right now, but my favorite thing was if I went to a party back when we would all go to parties, and I would hear someone referencing a Curious City story, and I would be like right behind them, and they had no idea who I was or what we did, and I was just like, oh my God, it's like part of the conversation. So that's similar in that, like, you hear from people out in the community who are like, I love what you're doing. And you might not go and, I don't know, Laura, do you like go home and count that on a tracker?
No, I probably should, but I haven't.
Right on. Yeah, any other, and even if it's a personal anecdote or a story, like, you know, once I did this story and included this source, and he dropped off a, you know, box of his homemade hot sauce at the station for us, which is a true thing that happened.
This is Catherine from Blue Ridge Public Radio. This conversation made me think of a metric that I never would have thought of before, which is just listeners calling us out of the blue after they've heard something to ask what a song was or where can they find that story. And I guess that was like more common a long time ago, but now people kind of just email or at you. So that, you know, kind of intimate, I trust you enough to call you on the phone and ask you a question that I have.
I love that. That's so important. If they see and they believe that your newsroom is one that A, cares, and B, will listen, then you should be getting input from folks. Like, that is one way of showing that you're accessible to people. So I love that. That's a great one. Okay,
I have,
yeah.
sorry, I
No,
think I have
please.
one as well from the membership side of things up at KTO. Frequently on our donation form, members can leave comments, and so we track that monthly and send it out to the newsroom and the whole staff. But people, I mean, they leave us some great in-depth comments about our reporting, mostly positive. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so great. And I'm so glad you shared that too, because one of the things we're going to talk about in this session is about the importance of shouting out those metrics and those successes and sharing them. And not just to be like, hey, let's all feel good, but also, hey, what can we learn from this? And how will it shape what we do? Hearing these sorts of things, how do you make sure that that feedback gets into the rooms of the people who might be affected by those decisions and might be able to, you know, adjust their approaches, strategies, decisions based on what you're hearing from people. So that's fantastic. Okay, fabulous. Well, the other thing to know here is that it's very important to keep track of some of these things that might be harder to quantify or be on a dashboard and share with membership folks, in part because this can be the fodder for whether it's pledge drive material, testimonials, things for membership newsletters, you know, profiles of listeners. These are things that can really also become the basis of really smart funding pitches for high donors, like high level donors or high net worth individuals who give to your newsroom. It's the stories about what you do and how it impacts people beyond the awards you might win, or beyond the fact that, you know, your listenership was up 10% in Q4 or whatever. These stories about what you do and how it impacts individuals are so key for fundraising and for finding people who want to support what you do in a way beyond just thinking, oh, it's a smart business decision to, you know, advertise on public media or whatnot. So just think about, as you have these beautiful little moments, can you share it with membership? Can you share it with whoever puts out the newsletter? Is it something you want to shout out in an all company Slack? So I will talk more about that later, but Now I wanted to just go to the other kind of metrics that you might imagine that, this session is about, which is the digital engagement metrics. And there's a whole spectrum of these, and I touched on this a little bit last time if y'all came to the last session, in that there's a real range of metrics, and they don't all necessarily, I don't want to value one over the other, but I will say the farther right you go on this spectrum, the deeper your relationship is with people. And for me, engagement is all about the depth and having meaningful relationships versus just like getting a bunch of people to click. What does that do in the world? We don't know. But when they're contributing to your newsroom, what it does is it makes your work possible. It makes more of these stories possible and changes the narratives of your community. So these are just some metrics, that will probably come up as ways that you might understand if what you're doing is quote unquote engaging, which is fine. There are ways that I think about this in terms of how you position the public when you're talking about metrics. Now, everything in the gray on the left-hand side is looking at the public as a consumer for the most part. They are there to take what you do and, listen to it, read it, watch it, etc. And that's kind of that relationship. But once they get into the contributing mode, whether they're a member, a donor, they're paying for special events, etc., they become a partner in what you're doing. They become a real investor in the work of public media. And so this is a graph I shared last time as well. This is a little bit, you can think of it like a funnel if you're familiar with funnel metrics. Thinking about the top being kind of like awareness and some kind of ambient engagement, and then the bottom being like a very warm relationship. So that could mean participating in the editorial process. And on the left-hand side, when you think about the public as a co-creator, you're thinking about the ways that they're engaging and how you're counting that on a qualitative level, not just quantitative. And on the right-hand side on the bottom, you're also thinking about that relationship in a very warm way. Because if someone's giving you their email address, their phone number, they're signing up for newsletters, they're saying, I want you in my life in some way, shape, or form. I'm inviting you into my inner circle. And so I look at this sometimes as a way of saying, when I'm spinning up a project or trying to do something, like where is this going to sit on the funnel? And what's the best case scenario for ways I might be able to know if this is having the depth of relationship that I think it can. So this is something you can return back to when you are setting metrics to see, does it really matter if you have return visits based on that story, or are you looking for something deeper or different? And the thing that I always, can't stop shouting from the rooftops, and I feel like I probably am annoying in the media world about this, is that if you start on the lower left hand and you position the public as a co-creator and you make engagement, like the real kind of engagement where they can shape what you do, core to some of your editorial offerings, the rest of these metrics just follow suit naturally. So when people are involved and they're engaged and they're part of the stories, they're much more likely to consume those stories, share them with their friends, and be your greatest marketer of all time, saying, hey, I was just in this great story by Blue Ridge, check it out. I'm here in a photo. They will share it with their friends. They will also be more likely to become a member or to get deeper with your newsroom. It's also a great way too, when you have the public as a co-creator, to start to work on diversity and inclusion and representation in your coverage. So if people are involved and they are seen and heard in your stories, whether it's their voice on the air or a photo in a story or a video, and they are not your typical audience, you start to teach your audience and other audiences you're not yet reaching that you are for them too, that you are here to support their work. So I just want to say the lower left-hand quadrant is the magic quadrant that powers them all. So the bottom line overall is the more your audience feels engaged and heard, the more that they actually see that you're serving them directly, the more likely they are to trust and consume your work and become members. And one of the greatest things I've seen in this kind of engaged work in journalism, and I just need to find a day to put together all the case studies here because it's pretty outstanding, the evidence, is that engagement work really provides a unique opportunity to showcase your values and to turn that into a business win for the bottom line of the organization. So when you do engaged journalism and you are listening to the public, however you do it, whether it's through surveys or interest groups or community, listening sessions and tons of different ways to do it, businesses are much more willing and likely to pay a premium to sit along an institution or a series that really is about community listening. So our partners at KQED have a series called Bay Curious. They have support from Sierra Nevada, which is in their underwriting and also on their website. Our partners at WBEZ get 6 figures for their Curious City slots every quarter that they open them up, because it's such a desirable brand to be associated with. And then we also see that engaged journalism for newsrooms that are able to track and really see someone on a digital path and on a listening path. We see that people who are engaged with these stories and who consume these stories that include the public are more than twice as likely to show up as donors or to convert to being a donor if they're not already. And the other thing that's really cool when you can do engaged journalism on a consistent basis, whether that's as a special project, a series, or just what you do, you can really make that part of your brand. So our partners at Vermont Public Radio, they have this great series called Breakout Estate that's public powered. It's all about engagement and answering questions. And they have fabulous branding around it. So you can see this shirt on the lower left. It says Brave Little State. On the back, it says Be Brave, Ask Questions. Every time they offer that as a membership gift for premium, for a limited time during the drive, it sells out immediately. So I think it was last year, the year before, 40% of their membership drive dollars came in the hours that they were offering this t-shirt, and they sold out immediately. So, that could be merch, it could be tickets to live events that are associated with your engagement work and other offerings. Here, I want to pause real quick to see if any membership folks or anyone else too in your newsroom, if you've done engagement work that has yielded dollars in some way or more members in some way. I'd love to hear your experiences too.
Just quick question. Do you know what the price point was for those shirts at VPR?
I could connect you with them. I'm not sure what the price point.
I'll reach out to folks there.
Okay.
I know Scott well, but just thought I would ask.
Yeah, they've been really, really popular. And I know Bay Curious also had water bottles for their membership drive that sold out really fast as well. And
awesome.
storybooks. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know they must have made a decent margin on them, but not sure what it was.
And not to flog this, but that's a great use of Hearken, Rima, is to create a brand around those questions, those prompts and those questions that come in.
Yeah, a lot of our partners end up doing, and again, there's lots of ways you can do this. So I don't just mean work with us, but we're happy to work with you and have tons of examples about how when you create these series or these special kind of places where people can be heard and be part of the storytelling, they really grow into beloved properties of your newsroom. And another thing I need to do is count how many new jobs have been created through this approach, because there's some newsrooms that now 6 or 7 people on a desk that didn't have one a year or two ago that's just devoted to answering questions because it results in more loyal and local listeners. Okay, so start where you are. And the old adage is so true of what you pay attention to grows, which is why it is so important to figure out what metrics are you going to pay attention to, because they will grow when you start to pay attention. So I wanted to open this up to everyone to do as a quick group exercise about which metrics you already track and what their value is. And this is just a way to kind of open up the room and hear what are some of the things that each other are tracking. And the most important thing is the right-hand column of, do these metrics impact editorial decisions? And if so, how? So I would love to, I'm going to go back into the mode where I can fill this out alongside y'all. But I'd love to hear anyone jump in with a metric that they use and to fill this out together live. And we can just do a handful of these.
Sure. So at KUNR, I run a WhatsApp newsletter in Spanish. So we look at the number of subscribers for that newsletter, which is still in its infancy.
Great. Okay, excellent. So you're looking at quantitative, right?
Yes.
There, the number. Okay. And what is the value of having, knowing that number and those subscribers?
Yeah, it can help a little bit with knowing how many people we're reaching. I know with having it on the radio, that could be a little ambiguous, but with this, it's pretty clear.
Okay, excellent. And then who in your newsroom is paying attention to this number?
Just me mostly. So since I do more of the Spanish engagement work, so bilingual reporter. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then does this make any impact on editorial decisions? Let's say if that group suddenly blew up and had 5,000 people in it, would that have an impact on editorial decisions? And also, does the listening that might happen in that group have an impact on editorial decisions?
Right. It hasn't really yet. That's part of our work with this America Amplified grant. But if that were to grow a lot, it would really, I think, guide what type of coverage we're offering in Spanish based on what has traction in that group.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, cool. I'd love another couple examples. Anyone else feeling brave?
I'll go from Blue Ridge Public Radio.
Great.
We track, there's a few things that we track in regards to our digital content. And in our weekly e-newsletter, we're just tracking, the basic metrics, the clicks, the opens, the, all of that kind of thing, the unsubscribes, the subscribes. And we've got an incredible open rate right now, and we've been really happy with that. We have been started, it used to be just basically membership development would pay attention to it, but we've been sharing it more across channels now with the content team and with our business sponsorship team, with the content team to kind of let the team know how this can really be an extension of the programming and have your content seen, even if it wasn't heard when it was live on radio. Also, we've also started looking at shares on the e-newsletters to see what is driving that. And with business sponsorship, we've started a dialogue with them about this so that they could see what the added value of inclusion being paired with our brand besides being on air is. So, if they're, negotiating in contracts or for sponsorships for various things, if there's an inclusion in newsletter or other things that we might do. And then we've also been looking at, we send like a special drip campaign to like people that come to us through either NPR or new members to kind of gauge their engagement with us. And those have been having really good response. Just try to see like, what is it that's motivating them? And yeah, like people get the drip campaign and they're like, I want a beanie. It's like, okay, we'll send you a beanie.
Oh, that's great. And so that, and you're looking at the drip campaign in terms of what they're clicking on, the open rate, kind of similar things to the e-newsletter?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, great. So this helps you understand their motivations. That's fabulous. And then who pays attention to the drip campaign?
Mostly our membership director right now, our membership manager.
Okay.
Does everybody know what a drip campaign is? I don't know.
Yeah, do you want to explain that?
I am not the best person to explain it.
I could take a crack if you need it.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, because I always stumble over it a little bit. So
drip, think about it as like, a drip of something dripping, where essentially you give your email address at some point in time where some information is captured, and then the newsroom is able to, through oftentimes a program like a CRM, be able to send you messages. And there's dynamic ways to program this as well, where it's like, send them one message a week, regardless if they open any of them. Or if they open this or click on this link, then send them this next. So it's a way of automating some of your messaging and trying to, get and understand what is keeping folks there. So it sounds like at Blue Ridge, you have a campaign that then can kind of lead people to do a few different calls to action, like, hey, do you want a beanie? And then they click on that, and it's not costing your membership folks the same amount of time as like emailing people individually.
Right. Jen, that was brilliantly articulated. And yes, I would say and what we're finding with the drip campaign, because it is different than your standard e-news subscriber, is those people are really engaged. And it's not that it's a large quantity at this point, and that's again where those metrics can get vague. If you were going by like how many people it is, it's not a lot, but those people that we are per capita are being really responsive. We have one that's already turned into a prospective board member.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. That's super cool. And with the, like going back to the e-newsletters and to this one, I want to talk about the last column here, which is, do those metrics impact editorial decisions? And tell me if this is right, but it sounded like having the e-newsletter does impact editorial's decision to spend some time on converting audio content into another format, whether it's a short article or something to link back out to the audio content. Is that correct?
I would just say we see it as kind of an extension of the content that they've already provided, and sometimes it might be in case you missed it, or future promotion, forward promotion, but just to raise awareness about, especially about what our local team is doing.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something you can think about with engagement too. For all of you that do have newsletters, that can be a terrific spot to actually get engagement at the front end of a story. So saying, hey, there's a big anniversary coming up of a plane crash, or this mayor, or this, time in history that's important to where we live. What are your memories, or what questions do you have about that to shape our reporting? So I just want to throw in there that e-newsletters can be a great way to start to solicit engagement that then does impact editorial decisions as well. Okay, fantastic. Well, this is great. This is was meant to be a learning, and hopefully you all thought a little bit too and learned from Blue Ridge and KUNR about some of the ways that they're thinking about engagement. And then this all important, these last two questions of, if a tree falls in a forest, it's like, is anyone there to hear it? If metrics are accumulating somewhere and you don't have someone who's paying attention to them, and then they're not able to share it with the folks who might be making editorial or business decisions, I should add there too, then they're not going to be as impactful as it can be. So that's going to be part of what our checklist at the end is, once you're creating metrics, is making sure they actually end up somewhere where they can matter beyond those individuals.
Hey, Jen, quick question.
Yeah.
We did a lot of quantitative.
Yeah.
Have you worked with anyone who has a good qualitative metric that's easy to track?
Yeah, so that is great that you asked. At the very end, I'm going to go through and share with you all as well this template, which you can feel free to use or not. Some folks may or may not have some kind of centralized dashboard that they're using to enter stuff into, but if not, here's one that you can make use of. And so what we do, and we do this at Hearken as well, is we have some of our core metrics that we keep in here, and we link to wherever it's reported, if it's a spreadsheet or somewhere else. And then we also have a tracker of like where are we sharing opportunities to engage. And then the last one is anecdotes and impacts. So these are things like got a thank you letter, or the mayor said they heard our story and it changed their mind on something. We call it at Hearken sexy intel, but you can name it whatever you want. But this is a way where you can have a spot to make sure whenever you're hearing stuff that's like, ooh, that's interesting, and that's maybe more of an anecdote versus or qualitative and something that might not be repeatable or scalable, to make sure you capture that. And so here I have like, what's the date, what exactly happened? Like in this case, our story on lead in the water went viral. The impact for the public is that we heard from public officials that they want to make it part of their mandate, like it changed, something about the city. The impact for the newsroom is that this producer is going to be now, cross-promoted on local TV. And the related goal that we had is like, we wanted to address needs we heard from our audience, and the story came from them, who entered it, and like where you shared success. So this is an example. You can always augment or share this or edit this kind of template, but it's a way of just prompting you to write down all the things of value as soon as you can, whenever those things happen, and encourage people to keep dumping them in here, because suddenly you'll be, a month into your work, and if everyone's just logging stuff as it happens, you have a newsletter's worth of content and wins to have here, tons of material for your marketing people and your member and donor relations people to pull from, and great material for board reports and leveling up to whoever it is that at the end of the day is supporting you. Might be funders like grantors as well, and putting in grant reports. So just having a centralized location. Some folks also have like a Slack channel where they share wins. But Slack, it's harder to have like this kind of structured data, of course, where you're like, who entered it? Where's the link? What was the impact? So I encourage you to think about how you can make it structured so that you have the same amount of data from everyone. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Excellent. So I did say here we have a 2-minute break, and I think we could do it. We have about a half an hour left. So why don't we, I'll just take a moment, stretch. I'll go off camera for a sec. I'll stop screen sharing for a sec, and we'll just take a little break, and then we're going to dive into some breakout rooms shortly to have some practice here. So we'll come back at 45 after the hour. All right, about 30 seconds left. All right, hope you just had a moment to stretch, do whatever you need to do, check your phone real quick, etc. We will jump back in to the presentation. And also, I got a question if these will be shared. The slides and the tracker, it will be shared. So after the call, I'll send Elisa the links to all of these that she'll share with you as well. So you will all have access to this stuff and the recording as well. Okay, so going into goals and metrics, best practices. Again, there's no silver bullet to say, you know, the best engagement metrics to track are open rate or number of donors or clicks or whatnot. It's really specific to each desk, the culture of your newsroom, the goals of your stories and reporting. And so this is why it's so important every time you're doing something new that, like, let's say you might have a bunch of metrics that your newsroom has agreed are important, just overall. So those might be things you just need to track all the time on everything. But when you're doing special projects, especially, or you're setting up a new desk, or you're thinking about DEI and how do you get better at it, that's a real opportunity to think about what are our goals and how will we know we're getting there beyond the sorts of things that we count anyway. And so this is an effort for us to like get a little bit of practice with this if you don't have it already. And if you do have practice on this, to just use this time to refine and get some feedback from folks about like how you think about your goals. So just want to say that there's a lot of jargon here. Words are hard, and I have an acronym here. This is so dorky. Sorry, I was like punch happy, or what do you call it? Slap happy yesterday. It was like acronyms even harder. AEH equals acronyms even harder. Thank you, Lisa. It was so dumb. But words are hard. And some of these concepts I still have to remind myself of all the time. And I've been doing OKRs or objectives and key results for a long time now. But I just wanted to go through a way of kind of thinking about them if your newsroom feels like word salad when it comes to these sorts of metrics. Here's how I've heard them used, and hopefully this aligns with how you use them as well. So goals, outcomes, objectives, these are all just a way of saying, what do you want to achieve? Usually they're inspirational. They are non-numeric, although sometimes newsroom will say our goal is 100 new members by Friday. But that could be a key result. I think your goal there is actually, have more people become part of what we do. And the metric you're using is a number. So, an example here would be reach younger, more diverse audiences, which is a common goal for a lot of media. Activities are the things you can do and things you can check off a list to help you reach your goals. So this might be, one way to reach younger, more diverse audiences is you create an Instagram account for the station and you're posting a couple times a day. when you know the difference between an activity and a goal and a key result is if you can check it off the list, and if it could make zero difference whatsoever, then it's just an activity. So for instance, one goal might be to have a scalable training program for youth reporters in your area. Well, one activity is going to be creating a curriculum. If the curriculum just exists, does that guarantee you've been successful at creating this this goal? It doesn't. It could sit in the corner and collect dust all day long. And you could create an Instagram account and post twice a day and nobody goes to it. So I just want to say activities are oftentimes things that newsrooms will put as a key result or a goal. But if they don't, at the end of the day, make a difference into something greater and turn into a different outcome, then they are just an activity. And it's important to track those. You need activities to reach your goals. Okay, the last part is all the word salad here of all the acronyms. Key results, sometimes called KRs, key performance indicators, you've probably heard about KPIs, SMART goals, which stands for, I should remember this, like measurable, time bound, et cetera. Like there's all these different aspects of that goal. And then metrics are often, a key result as well. And so these are all ways of saying, how do you know you're reaching your goals, your outcomes, your objectives? And we know that this did not used to be your problem if you're an editorial usually to figure it out. But like I mentioned before, there's great power in having a say and an understanding of what your metrics are and why. So an example key results here is that you want to increase your under 30 audience by 10% by Q2. So this wouldn't be a great key result or a metric if it just says increase under 30 audience by 10%, because if you did that in 10 years from now, would you consider that successful? Probably not. So you need to have some kind of time-bound benchmark as well when it comes to key results. So before I go on, I just want to pause real quick. Any questions on this front? Feel free to, unmute yourself so I can hear them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're really good at figuring out what we want to measure. We're not really great at figuring out what data supports that measurement.
Yep.
So how do we get better on that piece?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's like you read my mind. So we are going to, that'll be the thing we do after the breakouts, is talk about how you think about those things that are harder to measure and harder to articulate, because sometimes it's not going to be a number. And sometimes it's going to be something like a red, amber, green status, which is like everyone just coming around and being like, based on what we decide, how well are we doing? Green means we're doing great. Red means something's wrong, we got to change. Amber means like we're doing okay. So there are lots of different ways to use things non-numerically as well. And I'll get to that shortly in terms of different ways you can think about that. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, so being intentional about what to measure. So when you're ready to think about your goals for engagement, whether that's on a particular story, a project, an event, a series, etc., then you want to think about how you're going to know if it works. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing engagement work or any new thing, and you can't tell the story about why it mattered, and you think it was the most amazing thing you guys have ever done, it's going to get hard to convince bosses and the people above you or board or whoever it is that you need to convince that you should make more time to do it, unless you can tell the story about what impact it made and why, what your goals were and how you reached them. So this is another way of saying, if you want engagement to be more a part of your newsroom, it's even more important that you're clear about what metrics you have, what goals you have, and how you're doing, and communicate that out so that you can get more buy-in for the work. There are so many, it like makes me want to cry, but there are so many amazing projects that have happened out there, amazing experiments that the people who are part of them know were game changers. They were absolutely influential and did something unique. And then they could not for the life of them get other folks in the newsrooms to see what they saw and to say, let's do this again. Folks would say, oh, it just took too much time, too much energy. I don't know, that was a big thing. We don't have the ability. So this is the way to start telling that story. And if what you find is that your strategy didn't work. Your goals and metrics are going to tell you that, and you can adjust it for next time. So my biggest hope for you here is that when you're doing engagement work, especially the thing that is harder to kind of get buy-in for because it could be a little bit new to your newsroom, is to be very good about telling the story of why it matters and to whom. So what we're going to do here is we are going to think about for a moment a project or a series that you are working on, or something. It could be a story or an initiative, and write down a goal that you have for it, and then a metric that you could use to understand if you've met that goal. So examples here on the right, your newsroom at some point soon might have a goal of creating relevant election coverage. And how will you know that it's relevant and people are quote unquote engaged with it as a consumer? Could be the time on page is greater on those stories than average across the site. That would show you that people are coming to you and spending more time on that content. There could be 5 other metrics too associated with that, so that's just one example. Another goal is you want to reach people unlike the people you already reach. So diversify your audience. So you might have a metric that 50% of the engagement or the listening you're doing on the project comes from zip codes that are not zip codes that currently your audience is located in. The terrible but handy thing about the United States and most cities is that there is still segregation, especially around class and ethnicity and race. And so sometimes zip codes can be a way of looking at who are we not hearing from that we want to be part of our community and we want to serve better. So that's another example of like how you can have a metric. And you then of course need to figure out how do you collect zip codes when you're creating engagement on that front. So what we're going to do next is before we break out into groups, you are going to break out into groups of 2. Elise is going to split everybody up here for a moment. I want everyone just to take 2 minutes. If you have a paper and pen in front of you, great. If you don't, feel free to use whatever you have to think about something you're working on. It could be editorial, or if you're not in the editorial side of the house, something else, a project you're working on, a marketing campaign, and write down 2 goals and 2 metrics that you could have to reach those goals. And don't be too precious about it. Just give examples there because you're going to get feedback from a partner. But here's an example here. Understand what our audience wants and needs from us. A metric could be you receive 500 questions from the audience by the end of April. Or the goal is to make a difference for our community. Maybe you do a survey and you get an average score of 8 out of 10 from at least 20 respondents about that coverage. So, all right, I'm going to give everyone like 3 minutes here to think about something you're working on that you want to set goals and metrics around, and a couple goals and a couple metrics.
Jen, how long do you want the breakout rooms to look?
Yeah, let's give everyone 2 minutes, and then we'll have the breakout groups until 5 after the hour. That's about 7 minutes for break. Okay, so Lisa, whenever you're ready, if you want to split.
Hello. Hi, Crystal. Hey,
Hey, development after development. Oh my God, my head is spinning.
you know
So
what?
Stacey,
I'm in the middle.
Stacey is quitting.
Oh no, oh my God. Let me call you back in about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm in the middle of a webinar.
Okay, call me back.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Elisa.
Jen and Paula, you guys weren't supposed to be sent to a breakout room, but I didn't know how to not send you, so I sent you together.
That's fine. We had a nice conversation. So
Good.
thank you for that. All right, folks are coming back in.
I'm sorry, this technology still amazes me.
It's really amazing. I saw someone using like the whiteboard function in Zoom recently, and I was like, whoa, that's a whole nother, it's a whole nother level.
So we lost a few at the top of the hour, right, as we went to
Totally
breakout rooms, yeah.
All right, well, that's all right. We just have about 10 minutes left here, and everything that I'm going over today, you'll get in an email as well. So I just wanted to get a sense real quick. Was it helpful? Did you all get a chance to connect with partners and kind of get some feedback about what your goals and metrics were? Okay, excellent, excellent. Yeah, it always helps to share your metrics and your goals with folks, because they're all, more likely than not, they're going to help you think through it a little bit more critically, or open your eyes up to different ways that you can do things, or easier metrics to have. So that's going to be part of what I share now in terms of best practices. So I'm going to whip through these fairly quickly, but fear not, because you'll get a checklist at the end that has all of this information too. So when you are starting to think about metrics, it might just be you all by your lonesome trying to figure this out. But if you're in a group as well, you're going to want to confirm with your team, your boss, whoever it is that you're reporting whether or not this thing is successful with, that what your goals and metrics are, that you think is important for them to measure. Because the last thing you want to do is make all this effort into measuring something and you go to your boss and you say, oh, but did you get this? Or, oh, this isn't really that important to me, or it's not my job to care about that. So take a moment, even if it's just an email, to say, hey, for this new initiative, we're thinking these are the things that are important. What do you think? Get that buy-in beforehand, and that can also be key to starting to change the culture of the newsroom. Is saying, we're going to do something different this time. We're going to measure this and report how you're doing. The other thing is, kind of the best practices that we talked about before is decide on the numbers or the qualitative goals and make sure you always have a date. You can always change the date if you're like, oh God, I don't know what's realistic here. This is the first time we're doing it. Don't worry about it. Just put something down, and then you're going to know once you get going if it feels realistic or not. Okay, in terms of tracking, this kind of gets to Rima's question in terms of like, how are you going to track each goal? Think about what is going to be the simplest, most efficient way that you can track this goal. It might be very lo-fi, like you might just honestly have a sheet of paper next to your desk that you make a tick mark on every time something happens, or you report in a very simplified way that you don't need to make it into a huge dashboard with formulas and whatnot and automate things. But you might also be using some tools in your newsrooms where you can automate some of this reporting, so you don't have to spend more than 10 minutes a week or a month like checking in on how it is. And then if you end up finding that something that you feel is really important to track is just going to be so much more trouble than it's worth to set up the tracking for it, you can pick a non-numerical system. And like I mentioned this before, red, amber, green. And if there's a way where you can kind of take a temperature check if something is happening, or if it's happening a lot or a little, but you can't tell what, you can start to track over time. Are we at red? Are we at amber? Are we at green every time you do those check-ins? And then determine who is going to track that goal. Is it you? Is it someone else? Do you need to learn any new skills to track something? So often the metrics are like, yeah, these are metrics, and then it's not clear on who's keeping track and reporting back to people. The other thing is just about frequency. Just because you can see numbers every minute, every hour, or every day doesn't mean it's useful to look at them that often. So really think about when you have a metric, how often do you need to be looking at it to make sure you're on track? And don't give yourself extra work to look at it daily if it's not going to actually change what you need to do. Determine where you're going to do it. I have this very non-fancy dashboard I'll share with you. Google Sheets, shared documents, Slack channel. There's lots of ways to do it that don't have to be, a giant effort to put together. And then very, very important, I do this, I sometimes skip, I will say, I'll put this on my calendar to look at certain metrics, and sometimes I'll say, not as important, but I at least have a reminder on my calendar to say, check every so often. So as soon as you've decided how often you want to pull metrics, just put it on your calendar, recurring, right then and there. It could be 10 minutes, just remind yourself to do it, and you're going to thank yourself later. And if when you're checking in, you're like, oh, this is totally unrealistic, or, oh my God, we did so much better, let's up the metric. You can do that, and you have the opportunity to do that if you're paying attention. The big thing is, as well as I mentioned a couple times, is to share out when things are working, and also sharing out if something's not working and how you've adjusted, because your learning is going to be what helps drive the organization forward when it comes to metric setting and deciding what's important. And so think about when you do have success, who are the people who should know about it? Is it your boss, your colleagues? Maybe there's a channel in Slack used for wins. Maybe you share with your marketing or membership team. Maybe even share with your audience and say, hey, we were hoping to get 300 responses to this call out, and we got 500. Thank you so much. You're a 500 favorite. Tag people, etc. Like, think about who you can tell when you're doing well. And then, of course, give credit to the people who made it possible. So that might be your colleagues who are with you on the team. It's always reinforcing when you get incentivized in a newsroom and you get shout outs when you're doing these good things. So just think about anytime you have a great, even if it's small, win, share it, because people really, that drives their energy. Okay, so since we just have a minute or two left, I'll just say, think about that instead of talking about it as a group of how you share success. And then the resources, I will be sending these to you, or Lisa will, which has the checklist we just went through, and then also that template that I mentioned, where you can track what are your metrics and your goals. I put examples in there that you should make a copy of this and then write over with whatever you like. And then as well as like the anecdotes and the impacts and where you can do outreach about your engagement approaches. So we just have, how much time do we have left? We have 4 minutes left. So we have a couple minutes for questions. But before we get to questions, I wanted to see, and Elise, I forgot to ask you if we have another poll ready to go.
There it is.
Okay, yes, we do. Amazing. So take just 10 seconds here, and I want to see how I did. If I helped you feel more confident in setting your metrics than when you started, and if you feel more excited. I won't be offended if you say no. You're giving me valuable feedback to improve this if I do it again. Okay, we got to know. Thank you. You're not as excited, and you're not as confident. All right, we have 100% participation. Okay, so we had 84% said yes, they feel more confident. 84% also said they feel more excited. 16% said no on both. So if I were to do this again, what I would say is I would change my metric to say, you know, more than 75% of you feel more confident in setting metrics, because it is hard to get everybody on board, in part because some of you know way more about metrics than I do. And some of you have maybe a lot more time you need to take to figure out like how metrics are going to fit into your work, and it might not still be exciting yet. So I will say I've learned now how to adjust my metric. So if was I successful, I'll say more or less, but I could be more successful.
I would love to hear from somebody who ended up not more excited.
Yeah.
What was your issue?
Again, no offense taken.
Yeah.
But
It wasn't me, but in your defense, it's probably just a general disdain for metrics.
let's hope that's the case. I was hoping to try and share that they can be more exciting and more profound, but I know I still bristle at metrics myself. All right, well, I'm also happy to take anonymous feedback afterwards too. So that was the end of our presentation. I just had one more slide that said any questions. So we just have a couple minutes for questions. If you need to jump off, feel free. I'm so appreciative that y'all stayed, and hopefully this helped you think a little bit more expansively about why to do this and how to do it. And I'm also here to answer any questions you have.
Do you have any suggestions for sort of like maybe going deeper with some more traditional kind of analytics that you get? Like, I really like, we use Chartbeat for our website, and I like their engagement metric, which is like a combo of like traffic and time on page, and they kind of keep them together. And I look at that, but I try not to put like way too much stock in it because it only tells you so much. But like, if that's kind of like I know that's important, and that's the metric I look at there. Besides, I ignore page views. Like, how would you build off of, like, if you feel pretty comfortable with like kind of those more traditional metrics, but want to go deeper?
Yeah, the American Press Institute API has a fabulous tool called Metrics for News. And what they do is they help organizations really think about the blend of what those metrics are, because the ones that Chartbeat gives you out of the gate can be helpful, but you can get even more deep with, okay, what really matters to your newsroom, and be able to track it more deeply. So there are tools like that. There's also the site betternews.com and .org. I'll put a link there too in suggested reading. They have a lot of great stuff about funnel metrics and what to pay attention to and ways to get deeper on that front. But I would say overall Metrics for News, I think, is like 5 steps more sophisticated than Chartbeat. I don't know how much it costs to work with them, but I've heard great things.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you all so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I probably didn't publicize widely that this was an hour and 15 minutes. That's why so many people had to kind of shrug off. But this is recorded, so please share it with other people in your stations that you feel would get some value from it. Jen, thank you once again so much for helping us out. This was really valuable.
Thank you, and good luck with everything out there. Y'all are doing really important work, so don't forget that. All right, take care.